Polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS, is the main cause of infertility in women in the world right now. And about 6 to 12% of women worldwide are affected by PCOS, which is about 140 million women. However, they've estimated up to 70% of PCOS is undiagnosed, which means that that's only 1/3 of all the PCOS that is suspected to exist. Alright, so that technically would mean up to 18 to 30% of women have got potentially PCOS, which means that potentially about 30% of women are infertile in the entire world, and that's of reproductive age, of course. So that's a lot, alright? And in this video, I'm going to explain one of the most straightforward reasons for PCOS. Technically, there's heaps of different potential causes, but I am quite sure that the main reason for PCOS right now is obesity and insulin resistance, which comes with obesity. Alright, the two go hand in hand, alright? The reason I believe that is because PCOS hardly existed 200 years ago at all. Basically all women were fertile, were capable of reproducing. However, now obesity is high. Insulin resistance has become a problem in the world where several billion people are affected. Potentially 70% of the whole world is affected by it. And it makes sense to me. I've done my research and I think this is why women have PCOS. So in the past, I've made a video on why men are becoming infertile from obesity. You can watch that video on my channel, but this video will be a long one. It'll just be talking about PCOS and infertility in women. Okay, so to begin, you got to understand what insulin resistance is. Basically, it's when insulin is a hormone in our bodies created by our pancreas that basically stores sugar in our cells, alright? Predominantly in our muscle and our liver cells. So, but every cell for that matter uses glucose for energy. Basically, through modern diet, essentially, especially seed oils and linoleic acid, which is a fat that is found in all processed food now, basically over time causes insulin resistance. If you want to learn the actual processes that make that happen, there's other videos on my channel that explain insulin resistance and obesity in depth. But for now, all you need to know is basically modern food, processed food, is making people resistant to insulin, okay? Which means when your cells resist insulin, you don't absorb blood sugar into your muscle cells or your liver cells because they refuse to absorb it. The receptor is malfunctioning, okay? This means that the only cell in your body that can absorb the sugar and prevent you from dying from hyperglycemia are your fat cells. So this is why people become obese as well. It's because their fat cells become actually more sensitive to insulin and soak up all the glucose in their blood. Alright, so that's in short, without going too scientific or deep, that's essentially what's happening. But because you're not absorbing as much of the glucose, your blood sugar levels go really high, which means that your baseline insulin production goes high. So even when you're not eating food, you still have higher amounts of insulin. When you have hyperinsulinemia, this is what this is, alright? When you're not eating food, you still have elevated insulin and blood sugar. This is the precursor to diabetes as well, by the way. Diabetes is a more extreme version of this, alright? But that aside, I've already made a video on diabetes. You can watch that on my channel as well if you want. But basically, hyperinsulinemia causes high androgen synthesis in the ovaries. So androgens are the male sex hormones. Testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, DHT, these are masculine. They basically drive masculine traits through the androgen receptors. So androgens are required in women to some extent. They, just like estrogen is required in men to some extent, but low levels in each. All right. If you've ever seen the yin yang symbol, you know, where like the black and the white fish with the little dot in the middle, that's basically how it is, right? Where say the white is the feminine, females have got all the estrogen, that's the white bit, but then there's a little black circle, that's testosterone, and then the men have got testosterone, the big black bit, and then the little white circle is the little bit of estrogen, all right? That's basically how it's meant to be. That's the balance. Men have got high testosterone and androgens with a bit of estrogen to balance it, and then of course vice versa. So anyway, that's normal. But when you have a hyperinsulinemia, what happens is basically you start producing your ovaries, specifically in your ovaries, they start producing more androgens. So they make more testosterone and DHT. Now, this isn't natural. You don't produce that many androgens normally. You produce a tiny amount, but when you start producing more, because insulin basically drives that process, all right? Which normally that would only happen when you eat food. You get a rise in insulin, produce some more androgens, but then it's not constant, right? When you have hyperinsulinemia, it's constantly higher than it normally would be, so you produce more androgens all the time. Now, when you have too much androgens in your ovaries, it's toxic to egg development. Why? Because it's testosterone. It's masculine, and you're a woman, your ovaries aren't supposed to have too much testosterone. It's supposed to be estrogen and progesterone. But when you have too much androgens, it's toxic to egg development, which basically it inhibits follicular maturation, which means like the release of the egg. So the follicles have to mature within your cycle. This basically damages egg development and inhibits the proper maturation of your follicles, all right? Which means you don't release an egg. And that's what PCOS is, polycystic ovarian syndrome. You don't release an egg, which means you're infertile. And you don't get your period. I'm pretty sure you don't get your period either. Which is bad. It means you're infertile, and if you went to have children, you couldn't have children because you release no egg, and that means you can't get pregnant. So that's the first part. Now, the second part to this is when you have high body fat, which, like I said before, is caused by insulin resistance because your fat cells absorb all the glucose. The insulin stimulates fat creation, like adipocyte growth and fat storage, basically. It activates enzymes that store fat and inhibit fat burning. So when you have insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, you cannot burn fat and you just store heaps of fat, especially when you eat food. So long story short, you get fat, and when you have higher body fat, like peripheral body fat, like belly fat, and in basically excess body fat that isn't healthy, what basically happens is it increases peripheral estrogen, which means the estrogen becomes too high in your bloodstream. And women obviously need estrogen, but the thing is they have cycles, so they have ebbs and flows. The estrogen comes up for their ovulation, and then it comes down after ovulation, and their progesterone comes up. Basically, if you have high peripheral estrogen all the time, this basically, they're in your hypothalamus, you have receptors for estrogen that help regulate the production of hormones, of sex hormones, all right? Now, I addressed this in my video on how obesity is making men infertile. Basically, this just, when it activates those receptors in the neurons in your hypothalamus, it basically lowers the production of GnRH, which is gonadotropin releasing hormone. Gonadotropin tells your pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Now, in both men and women, these are basically what stimulate. Luteinizing hormone makes hormones, so testosterone in men and estrogen or progesterone in women. And then follicle stimulating hormone makes sperm in men, and in women it probably, well, I haven't done enough research yet, but I'm pretty sure it makes the eggs develop. So basically, when you have excess body fat, basically you lower these hormones that stimulate you to create local estrogen in your ovaries and progesterone, which would regulate the development of the egg. This lowers the local estrogen and progesterone production in the ovaries, and that blocks ovulation. So that's the first two bits, and then finally there's a third bit. When you have insulin resistance, you have a lower metabolism. This means you have lower T3, you basically produce less mitochondria, and you have a slower metabolism. You use less energy, and so your body senses that it's starving and it's not making enough energy. So this also reduces your fertility, because if you're starving to death, you're not going to be able to reproduce, are you? Okay, so your body thinks it's starving even though you're fat, and you get reduced fertility through that. So that's three separate mechanisms that all directly affect female fertility, and I suspect that's the cause of PCOS. There's other like causes like inflammation and reactive oxygen species, like but those are often caused by modern diets, by inflammatory food, by linoleic acid, and processed food and seed oils and that sort of thing that increases inflammation. So even if you suspect that, the scientists suspect that it's inflammatory cytokines that are causing infertility and PCOS, you know what causes, unnaturally high levels of inflammation in your tissues, right? You know what causes that? These modern diets with high amounts of polyunsaturated fat, seed oils, linoleic acid. So yeah, that's what's causing it. If you have PCOS, what you need to do, I mean, you can watch other videos on my channel to learn more, but basically you just need to lose your excess body fat, become sensitive to insulin again, and basically get a healthy diet. And what does that look like as well? Because you might think, oh, we should go vegan or something like that. The only benefit to being a vegan is if, say right now, you eat processed food, you eat KFC, McDonald's, you eat Doritos, you drink like Coca-Cola, fucking, you're snacking all the time, and you're eating donuts and chips, popcorn, all that stuff. If that's what you're eating right now, and then you were to go vegan, well, technically, yeah, being a vegan would be healthier, wouldn't it? Because you're not eating processed food anymore. But veganism itself isn't healthy. It's just not as harmful to your body as this processed food. So what you need to do is not go vegan. You need to eat more meat, eggs, fish, and cheese. And I say that because vegetables have got very poor mineral bioavailability, which means that, say for example, spinach, 100 grams of spinach has got about 2.6 milligrams of iron. 100 grams of steak from cow, like a big steak, 100 grams of that has also got 2.6 milligrams of iron. However, from studies, the spinach, you might absorb at best 5%. However, from the steak, you absorb 35% because it's heme iron and it's not bound to plant defense chemicals that block the absorption, all right? And that's a real thing. If you don't believe me for some reason because of the propaganda that you've seen, then search it up yourself. Search up plant defense chemicals, or search up bioavailability, mineral bioavailability. Basically, lots of women are also deficient in iron because when they have their period, they lose blood and stuff. So the only way to get more iron would really to be eating more red meat, because red meat has got lots of bioavailable heme iron. Like if you ate 500 grams of steak every day, then you wouldn't be deficient in iron at all. However, if you ate 500 grams of spinach, you'd still be deficient. Even though it's got high amounts of iron, you're not absorbing more than 5%. All right. And by the way, this doesn't apply just to iron. It applies to all minerals. Magnesium, it applies to calcium, it applies to zinc, it applies to phosphorus, and all the other minerals as well, like manganese. Potassium, not so much, but potassium is an electrolyte and there's heaps of it in everything. Meat has got heaps of potassium, milk, fruit juice, vegetables, grains even, like everything's got potassium, all right? So the problem is that you're not going to absorb as much minerals from plants, like vegetables in particular, as you will from meat and like animal foods, all right? Calcium is most bioavailable from dairy, of course. Even lactose improves calcium absorption. Casein improves calcium absorption, which is the protein in cheese and milk. And it has no plant defense chemicals which would naturally inhibit your absorption of it. All right, so basically what I'm saying is do not go vegan. Eat some vegetables if you like, eat some carrots, or I don't know, eat some potatoes every night. Well, yeah, maybe potatoes if you like, but at the end of the day, they're not nutritious. You can't seriously believe they're nutritious. In terms of vitamins, vitamin A is only found in animal foods. Vitamin D can be found only from the sun and animal foods. Vitamin E isn't actually necessary if you're eating low amounts of polyunsaturated fat, which only really comes from nuts and plants, okay? And like vegetable oil, seed oils, that's all unsaturated fat. You only really need lots of vitamin E, because vitamin E is a fat-soluble antioxidant that helps reduce oxidative stress in your cell membranes from polyunsaturated fat. So the problem isn't that you're deficient in vitamin E, the problem is that you're consuming too much linoleic acid, which is prone to oxidation and accumulates heavily in cell membranes, especially mitochondrial membranes. So that is also why you produce less ATP. That's why you become insulin resistant, is because of that, okay? So that's why you need to consume more saturated fat and monounsaturated fat from meat, eggs, fish, and dairy, okay? So that's why I say that, because you need fat. Fat is healthy, but it has to be from animal food, all right? And then of course protein, all those foods have got high amounts of bioavailable protein. And just for the record, if you think plants have got good protein, like say beans are so good for protein, or peanuts, you only absorb around 50% of that protein, because most of it's blocked by fiber. Fiber itself is an anti-nutrient that blocks the absorption of protein. So not to mention the fact that beans are only 6% protein. So you'd have to eat 100 grams of beans to get like 6% or 6 grams of protein, and half of that you're not even absorbing. So realistically, like even peanuts are like 25% protein, but if you're only absorbing half, that's like 12.5%. If you look at bread, it's 12.5% protein, but the thing is it's all gluten, and gluten can't be absorbed, and it irritates your gut. So it's like there's not any real protein in plants. You need to eat animal foods, because meat, for example, you absorb like 98% of all the substance in meat, and that includes the protein. So you're absorbing nearly all the protein. Not to mention the fact you have all the amino acids you need. You get all the minerals. You get heaps of zinc, heaps of iron, heaps of phosphorus, heaps of potassium. Not so much calcium, but you can always drink milk or eat cheese, which has got heaps of calcium. Like there's so many reasons why you should eat animal products and not plant products, because like eating fruit, like if you want to lose body fat as well, I might add, if you want to lose body fat, you have to lower your insulin levels, all right? That's really the key, because insulin basically regulates how much body fat you are storing, all right, or versus burning. So if you're eating carbs from grains, from fruit, then you're not going to be burning as much fat as possible, all right? Especially when you're resistant to insulin, and your fat cells are the only cells that are listening to insulin that actually respond. That means that even if you eat rice and like chicken, that still raises your insulin levels to like 70 microunits per milliliter, which, look, you don't need to know the exact terms, but basically the only way to actually get into fat burning is by getting your insulin below 5 microunits per milliliter. And the only way to do that is by not eating food for at least 12 hours or so, all right? So, especially like if you're insulin resistant, it'll take maybe 24 hours before you can actually get your insulin levels low enough to start accessing that fat burning, all right? So that's part of why I don't think you need to eat any plants. So that's how you cure PCOS, is by basically doing fasting, eating basically animal food predominantly with high amounts of minerals and vitamins, and protein and fat, healthy fat, not polyunsaturated like linoleic acid. Basically you'd end up burning off all your excess body fat. You would get lean, you would restore insulin sensitivity, you would replace your cell membranes and mitochondrial membranes with more saturated fat, especially mitochondrial membranes in particular. That will make them more stable. That will basically improve the electron transport chain, so you can make more ATP, which means you'll be creating more energy. You would become more sensitive to insulin. The insulin receptor will start working properly. You'll start absorbing glucose in your muscles and liver. Then basically that'll lower your baseline insulin levels, so you'll stop getting hyperinsulinemia. It'll be normal blood insulin, which means now you won't produce as many androgens in your ovaries. Your androgen production will go down. This means that it'll no longer be toxic for your eggs. Your follicles will actually mature properly. You'll start releasing the egg, and then you'll be fertile again, all right? You'll increase the amount of cellular energy you have, the amount of ATP you're producing, because you won't be resistant to insulin. So now your body has more abundance. It thinks it can actually reproduce now, that it's safe and it has enough food. And then as well, your peripheral estrogen levels will come down, all right? Which means that your hypothalamus won't be getting the negative feedback loop telling it to stop producing GnRH and subsequently luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which means those levels will go up. You start producing more of those hormones, which will then cause your ovaries to produce more estrogen and progesterone when it's supposed to. so that your eggs will develop properly and you will start ovulating again, and you will have single-handedly fixed PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. That is how you do it. Okay, it is hard, but it is by no means impossible. Just because mainstream science hasn't like figured out the cure yet, doesn't mean there is no cure. Because I think anything is possible, anything is reversible, all right? Especially with our health. Once you actually understand the problem and like what's causing it, why it's causing it, how it's causing it, the mechanisms behind the causation, and then you proceed to figure out how you can undo that, how you can reverse that naturally, that's when you realize that it is curable, it is solvable. So there you go, I've just basically solved PCOS for you, infertility in women, so you can become fertile again, you can have kids if you want to be a mother, you can do that now. You're not restricted by your health. Alright, so I hope this helped you. So I genuinely spent so much effort making this video, so hopefully that teaches you everything you need to know. If you want to learn more about insulin resistance, how that works, polyunsaturated fat and stuff, the things I mentioned that you don't understand, I promise my other videos that I have, you can check them out. They will teach you everything else you need to know. If you think that this is good, then subscribe, because you'll just get to see more videos like this, my videos that will help you. Alright, so yeah, and if you want me to personally help you as quickly as possible using science and of course nature, because all of this is natural and aligns with our evolutionary biology, alright? So how we evolved in nature, how we were supposed to live, alright? All of this mimics that and, well, returns to that. So if you want to learn, if you want to rapidly lose your excess body fat, I have a community that you can join. In the description is the first link. Hopefully I'll see you there. Yeah, thank you for watching. Good luck.